Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Well, good evening, Adam, and good morning from Melbourne. It's quite strange for us to do like a virtual recording like this when it's so late where you are and it's so early where we are. So we just really want to say thank you for joining the podcast and thank you for taking the time, especially it's the end of the day for you. So we really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. It's like I told you, it's an adventure. You know, I 10 o'clock at night, no problem. I'm from over here in Florida.
Yeah. So just for the listeners who are listening who might not understand what's going on, we are in Melbourne in the studio and Adam's in Florida. So we are in a very different time zone. So it's fun. We'll see where we go with this today, and hopefully it's the end of the day for you, but you still have the energy and to be able to share the insights and some tips with our audience, especially because today we're talking about well-being and emotional intelligence in the context of well-being. So as a tradition on the show, before we start, we always invite our guests to introduce themselves, because what's the better way for the audience to get to know you than from yourself? So it'll be great if you could introduce a bit about yourself, your work, who you are as a professional and also as a human.
Sure. Well, my name is Adam Rosensweig. I live in Ocala, Florida. I grew up down in South Florida, down in a small city called Sunrise. It's about the Miami area. And I moved to Central Florida, where Ocala is, when I was in my teens. I started out working blue collar. I was in construction. I went into professional development about 6 years ago. I started my own company. I have my mentor is part of my company. She's my business partner, mentor, and friend. She and I, she lives in St. Augustine, Florida, and she has a practice. I don't want to call it a practice. She has a practice. She has where she does motivational enhancement. Her name is Jay English, and she taught me a lot of things, and we went into business together. And she coached me into doing emotional intelligence. So I got certified in an assessment made by a company called Multi Health Systems. They're based out of Canada. And I use that as part of the cohesive training that Dr. English and I do. Normally, we work with corporations in the corporate area, but it also can do individual coaching and training, which is related to the topic at hand. And so it's been a lot of fun. It's been very educational, a lot of adventures, like tonight. Well, at least for me tonight, for you during the day. So yeah. I've met a lot of great people. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm really happy to be here.
That's an amazing story, how you started out doing something completely, I would say, unrelated to what you're doing right now. And here you
Very
are.
unrelated. Very unrelated, yes.
Yeah. I could understand why you use the word adventure quite a bit, because it sounds like your life's been an adventure so far. And now you're in the field of emotional intelligence. Very interesting story. And I'm sure we'll be able to unpack that even more in a little bit. And, as we start this topic, we always ask our guests to sort of give us a definition, because you are certified in this area. You've done tests and, like there are lots of certifications that I assume would be related to this field. So based on your expert knowledge, what would be the definition of emotional intelligence?
So that's a common question. Technically there is no universal definition. There are various definitions. They all kind of carry the same underlying message. The way I describe it is that emotional intelligence is a set of emotional skills that enables us to aim our talents and our skills to effectively cultivate good relationships with ourselves, because people don't realize a lot of times, or we just miss the fact that we have a relationship with ourselves, and then relationships with other people. The official definition that comes with the assessment that I use does it this way. It says that EI is a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. So it's ultimately it's about using our emotions productively rather than them getting in our way or being counterproductive to any kind of goals we want to achieve. So
Yeah.
that's how I describe
Wow.
it.
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
It
It
is.
takes a
It
bit,
is. So I
yeah,
gave you. I get you. You asked for one. I gave you two.
yeah, it takes a bit of time to kind of process just the definition. You know what? I'm actually curious now because while you're giving us the definition, and I know you've told us a little bit about the story itself, but what got you to be really interested in emotional intelligence in the first place?
Well, I have to take you back a few years ago when even before I started my company, because what wound up happening in my life, and it's kind of funny because I used to have this uh, negative view of life coaching and personal development and things like that until my life went sideways and I wound up needing it because, as often happens, childhood things stay with you throughout your life, and I wound up getting into kind of a life crisis, and I needed help. And so, because I needed the help, and I'm a religious person, I prayed about it, and lo and behold, I wound up meeting Dr. English, who is my friend and mentor now. I went through her program, and I felt how I felt like it was an answer to my prayers, and I wound up changing my life. It changed my life. I saw how much better I felt. I found an inward emotional strength I didn't know I had. I overcame things I didn't know I could. It was so transformative. I started thinking about leaving construction to do something else. At the time, I didn't know what I was going to do, but just even that having that emotional strength allowed me to start thinking about other opportunities. And because all this time, Dr. English and I had become closer and closer, that's when I started thinking about working with her because I loved what I learned from her as much as I did. And because I really started to understand and comprehend how much taking control of my emotions, what it did for me. And I realized that this really is powerful and can help other people too. So I started my company to really market her and the training that I got from her. But emotional intelligence is part of that. She coached me into getting certified and for me to have on my end have my training based on EQ. So I'm interested in it because I know how it helped me. I didn't know it at the time what I was doing, but when I look back on it, I realized I was enhancing myself emotionally, my EI, quite substantially. And I wish I had taken one of these assessments at the time. That way I could actually compare myself to the way I was because I could feel it and I saw its effect on my life. So it's a passion of mine
Yeah.
that I love what it does for people. I saw what it did for me. I want to share it with other people, and it's not, when we think about professional and personal developments, we think a lot of times it has to be this epic thing, and it really doesn't. It's just when you have an assessment that shows you where you stand and where you could grow, and you start applying things, just being aware of where I could improve, and then just it's a matter of changing your mind. And so yeah, that's what really got me into it was I could do a lot of things, but because I was passionate about it, I decided to pursue it. And I really had to be that way because I went into this profession green, brand new. That's the only thing that really has kept me moving forward all
Yeah.
these years, because otherwise I might have given up if I didn't have that drive.
Oh, totally.
And to right now, I mean, that's what motivates me to be here at 10 o'clock at night, speaking with you. I mean,
Yeah.
it really does. I'm enjoying this because I love what I do, and I love
Yeah.
talking about it,
Amazing.
and I love people who are interested in it, and it's just, I love it.
Yeah, well, I could see the transformation already, even though we just barely got started. So we'll dig deep into the theory and the nuggets of wisdom in a little bit. But just for our listeners who might not know about your company, what is your company's name and what do you guys do to help people?
Yes, so my company's name is Rosenzweig Research and Development. The acronym is RR&D. The research part of it is doing the data analysis using the assessment and the science behind what Dr. English does and what I do. The development part is enhancement. It's I know I want to enhance myself. How do I get there? Well, this is the information I have in front of me. That's how I get there. On a personal level, you can do it on one-on-one with a company. A lot of times they'll use it to enhance their people because EQ is really the foundation of somebody's performance. So, no matter, and I'm not saying IQ is not important. IQ and talent and education is important. But like I said, like in the definition, I talked about how to aim it. If we can't aim it properly, we're not near as effective as we could be. And
Yeah.
we'll get into the value of these
Yeah.
different elements of EQ as time goes on. But when it comes to enhanced leadership, change management, um, performance enhancement in general, performance enhancement for like a sales team or something like that, how does emotional intelligence support that? And we identify what that is, and then we do the training accordingly. So
Okay.
it's we that efficiency, productivity, and profitability. That's what we really aim for within a company, and how EQ supports that.
Yeah. Yeah, in the context of the podcast, we talk a lot about the benefits of certain areas to our personal life. But, work is a big part of life. And I'm sure things we pick up from work, we can apply to our personal life as well. So I'm keen to learn more about this topic as we go. And definitely, I'm sure the listeners will benefit from it as well. But before we do that, we always get to know the guest a little bit better. Even though we know your name, we know your work, we might just want to get to know you a little more. So we warm up ourselves and really open our minds to the insights you're going to share. And this is what we call a rapid fire section, or sometimes we just like to call it "Have you met Adam?" So
Okay.
here are some recommendations that Adam you're gonna give our listeners, and it's
Okay.
on 10 different areas, and
Okay.
we'll just be quick. So hopefully, listeners get some really nice suggestions from you after today. The first thing that we want to know from you is a book that you like or you recently read.
Book I like or recently read. Well, I any book that I make time to read is usually an educational one. So, um, there's an old book called Think and Grow Rich by a man named Napoleon Hill. It's widely popular. It was written right after World War One, before World War Two. The idea behind the book is how to be successful. And technically it's about being rich, but it can be applied to really any element of life, whether you want to be more successful with personal relationships, business, or really anything. The principles can be applied. So I think that's a good book to read if you want to educate yourself
Yeah.
and enhance your life.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna put that on my list. Thank you for that. And what
You're
about
welcome.
a movie that you like or you would recommend?
Does it matter when it was made?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Well, I'm somewhat of a geek, so I always enjoy Star Wars.
Oh,
So
hey,
I know
you
a
know
lot.
what? May is coming. You know when?
Oh,
When
that's
we're
right.
gonna be really happy. Oh, May the
May the
4th.
4th, May the
Yeah.
4th, and Revenge of the 5th.
The
That's right.
funny thing is May the 4th is coming, but Doctor Strange is out on that day. So I'm just like, okay, what do I do?
Uh,
Uh, but yeah, I'm
decisions.
nerding out. I'm nerding out with you as well. There you go.
So if
All
you if
right.
you live under a rock and you haven't seen those movies, I recommend them.
Oh yeah, we definitely recommend them. I agree with you for sure. What about podcast? What is a podcast that you would recommend?
Podcasts that I would recommend. Um, there's a fun podcast called Hardcore History that I enjoy. It's a commentary. It's a man who does commentary on world history, and Dan Carlin, I believe his name is. And if you have about 5 hours, to enjoy some commentary on world history, it's something that I've enjoyed listening to. He touches on various subjects, and you can pick it up. You don't need to go 5 hours straight, but you can pause. You can pause it, and there's
Yeah.
that one. So I'll stop there. That's what
Yeah,
I've
no
enjoyed.
one's ever suggested a 5-hour podcast before, so you're definitely winning. Thank you for
He,
the recommendation.
you're welcome.
Yeah, that'll be a good one to learn from for sure. It sounds really interesting. What about a documentary?
A doc. Hmm. I haven't seen a documentary lately. Um,
How about the last one you saw?
I suppose the first one I think of is the Planet Earth series, where
Oh, yeah.
it's about nature and the different animal and the different ecosystems and things like that, and it's really in high definition.
Is
Um,
it Our Planet that you're referring to, or is it Planet Earth,
there's
another
been
one?
more than one. It
Yeah,
might it
okay.
might be that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I think it's the one from David Attenborough, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the one I'm thinking of was Sigourney Weaver. I think was the
Oh, okay.
commentator.
So that's another one. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And how about your famous role model, if you have one?
Like I said, I'm a religious guy, so the obvious answer would be Jesus. But if I'm going to pick somebody alive right now, a role model, it would be my mentor, Dr.
Mm,
English.
yeah.
She is really inspiring to me, and I really appreciate the way she's guided me and helped me and believed in me. So I would say her.
Yeah. You've mentioned her quite a bit, so I'm sure she's had a big influence on you and your work. It's very, yeah, very heartwarming to hear. We always love a good role model that we actually work with.
Right.
So that is something that's going to be good for the listeners to pick up on. Maybe today is your day to go out and find that mentor that will change the way you think. How about a course that you've recently attended, or maybe just the last one you attended, if it was a long time ago?
Course that I attended. Probably
Yeah.
the last course that I attended. I mean, I most most of the courses that I've done have been with Dr. English. So I mean, I don't know, 4 months ago,
Yeah.
I went through my next phase with her. So if you're talking about training, that's probably what I've done.
Yeah. So what's the course name, if you don't mind sharing?
She does what she calls motivational enhancement.
Ah.
So, she has her PhD in neurolinguistic psychology, and she specialized in motivation. So why do humans behave the way they do, and helping people get to know the who of who they are and what drives them and who they were born to be. So it's very deep. I'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
Okay. Okay. We'll park it there. That sounds really intriguing. And if anyone wants to learn more about these courses, I'm sure they can reach out to you or Dr. English, because
Sure.
I'm sure it's not just limited to one or two people. I hope. And how about an event that you've attended, given the current climate? If you have attended any recently.
I have, because of my wife's health issues, I've pretty much avoided large events. If you want to count this as an event, I'm part of an HR social group, human resources social group or networking group that I'm a part of. And for the first time, we actually met together in person about a month or two ago. So it was a small group. So that was, an event, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting how you're doing emotional intelligence, and that is a group for HR. But
Yeah.
I guess it's
Yeah.
somehow related to your work, especially because
It
you deal with
is.
humans. So yeah,
Right, because HR deals with people, they're in charge of the training.
yeah,
So
yeah,
to be
yeah.
in
Okay,
that group makes sense.
yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, sounds exciting. So now that listeners have got to know you a little better, we are going to jump into the serious part, the topic
Okay.
of today. And we've touched on emotional intelligence, but obviously the podcast has a really strong emphasis on well being. So we
Mhm.
would love to hear your personal definition or understanding of well being.
Okay. So I have a colleague who has a worldview on this that I think is a good a good way to look at it that I've kind of adopted myself, because he talks about there being 5 forms of wealth. Usually we think of money, but there's time, money, health, satisfaction, and relationships. So, and if you want to break it down, when it comes to health, you're talking about physical, mental, emotional health. So when I think in terms of well-being, I think in terms of having prosperity in most, if not all, of these elements of life. Being satisfied with our life, having good relationships with other people, having good health, you know, enough money to have a good life, and having enough time to enjoy all of it, right? So, if we can have a way to have a healthy level of all of these things, I feel like that really contributes to a person's well-being. Um, Hopefully I
Yeah.
answered your question. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I think it's something different from usual for sure because it has a more holistic look. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say yeah, definitely it's your understanding based on the influence that you've had in your life, and I find that to be quite insightful. It's another way to look at well being. And with that definition, we always kind of dig deep into the different misconceptions as well, because
Mm-hmm.
on the one hand we have the understanding, on the other hand we have the misconceptions that people encounter. So to you, what would be some of the misconceptions that people get when it comes to well-being?
I think the worst one is the idea that money is the most important of all these forms of wealth.
Mm.
Because what people will do, and I'm sure some of us have witnessed this, is that people will pour all of their energy into attaining money with the expectation that that's what's going to bring contentment and happiness at the expense of these other things. So they will burn their time, they will burn their relationships, they will burn their health in favor of achieving money, and at the end of it, they they don't achieve what they set out to do, and it's very destructive. So I think when it comes to misconceptions, I think a balance needs to be among all these 5 elements, but also recognizing them when we have them. Because I can have $1 million in my back pocket, but if I don't know it's there, it doesn't do me any good. So having the ability to be grateful and recognize the good health that we have, because when we talk about good health, you know I have 2 arms, I have 2 hands. I'm grateful for the fact that I can live my life that way, that I can have two legs, 2 feet. I can, I mean, what do we have that we can be grateful for? And sometimes we take things for granted. So to stop and acknowledge these different forms of wealth that we do have, I think, is another uh, misconception. In a way, a misconception. Like maybe people have a misconception that they're maybe not as prosperous as they think they are, but when they stop and examine what they have, they really are
Mm.
more than they think they are.
Yeah,
So.
that is true. Yeah, we talk about gratitude quite a bit when it comes to well-being, and on the podcast as well.
Hmm.
And I think it's such an important factor. And you're absolutely right. Like one of the biggest misconceptions that um, we've addressed, and our team, we have research about this as well, and we discuss it all the time. And sometimes you just forget that you're already really wealthy, in the terms that you're using now. You're talking about the
Hmm.
different kinds of wealth in 5 different aspects. And I think I kind of related to emotional intelligence in this context, um, especially because it's a topic of today, but also because I feel like when you kind of you're able to recognize the different parts of your emotion, sometimes it plays into your well-being. What I'm trying to say is more around the gratitude that you mentioned, the misconceptions, because sometimes you are unaware of how you're feeling and you're ungrateful at the same time. So being able to
Hmm.
recognize how you're feeling and also infuse that with a dose of gratitude, maybe that will help massively with your well-being, because the topic we're talking about is definitely well-being. And also today we are digging deeper into emotional intelligence. So, we already heard your definition of emotional intelligence, and that's great. But how about we bring that together? To you, then, what do you think to be the relationship between emotional intelligence and well-being?
Well, I mean, I think there's no separating the two. Certainly when it comes to our health, when it comes to our emotional health, the better grasp that we have on our emotions, because I mean, it's you have emotional health and emotional intelligence. The healthier we are, the better we feel. The better we feel, the more it improves our well-being. The studies show the happier we are, the more productive we are. In work and at home. This is not just about at work; it's about at home too. Anybody who's ever been angry or frustrated or has these negative feelings, it's a lot harder to get anything done because you can't concentrate. That's the feelings getting in the way. But when we have control over our feelings, we become more productive. Our stress goes down. Studies show that we actually our body gets harmed when we're overstimulated with stress and anxiety. So that actually affects our physical health. Even when it comes to, studies have shown that empathy is a huge factor in medical treatment. One, because a doctor will, when we feel seen and heard and understood, we feel better emotionally, and therefore it helps us physically. But also, when a doctor displays empathy toward another person, it stimulates good communication, and it actually, because of the better communication, better treatment can be given. So even indirectly,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence affects our physical health. Um, we make better decisions, we make faster decisions, we have better, more time as a result because we make better decisions. Our decision making ability is enhanced. I'll put it that way. That allows us to save time, money, energy. Certainly, our relationships with other people is affected, because that's a huge factor in EQ, is building trust, building relationships that are built on trust and compassion, having empathy toward other people, going out of our way to do things for the greater good, maybe when nobody else is looking. All these things are stimulated by our emotions, and when that happens, society benefits, families benefit, communities benefit. So it hits all of these elements of well-being that I touched on and that we're discussing
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've definitely also read that in a book somewhere, especially when you mentioned that example of the doctor and the patient. Recently, I've been reading way too many books. I cannot remember what the name of the book was anymore. But I can totally relate it with that. And I feel like a lot of the things that happen in even our daily lives, if we're not the doctor but we're the patient in this scenario, right? It's so important when we recognize that emotional intelligence plays a big part in how we go about our lives. And I know that the assessment that you provided, it has a focus on, like the workplace and teams, but you also briefly mentioned that it could be applied to individuals as well. Um,
Hmm.
However, I think maybe we take it one by one, because there are, aspects, the aspects that kind of blend together, especially after the pandemic, right? Work is
Hmm.
not just work anymore, especially a lot of us are now working from home. Sometimes work is at home. And in the past, you used to bring work home with you, but now work is at home with you all the time. And
Right.
it's kind of like, I think it's intertwined, and it could affect a lot of factors. It's not just the relationship you have with your colleagues, your teams, but perhaps also the relationship you have with your family at home. So I think one of the main things that we really wanted to dig into today is how important it is, emotional intelligence, given all the things that you have brought up. What is its role in the workplace? Because work is such a big part of our lives. And then perhaps if there's room, we can also relate that to how that affects our life, our overall well-being in life as well.
Certainly. Well, the reality is no business functions without people. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Nothing happens without people. We don't fuel our cars without people. We don't buy our coffee without people. Somebody has to be behind the cash register. Somebody has to serve the coffee. Somebody has to operate the gas station. somebody has to fly the plane if we're traveling. Somebody has to build the car that we're driving. There's no functionality in business without people. So what drives people? It's emotion. Without people have this misconception that emotion is something to be pushed aside or combated, or it's like, no, emotion, you cannot remove emotion from people. It doesn't work. So the only thing to do is to use it. Don't try to fight it, and leverage it. So that's what emotional intelligence does. It helps people have a better understanding of who they are, how they feel about themselves, their relationships with other people. And when people have, and I'm sure there are other questions, we'll get more into it, but it helps people get along, because the biggest problem in business is a lack of trust. And people within a business fighting with each other, or not getting along, being toxic with each other, and bogging down the business, and therefore efficiency is lost, money is lost. It ruins companies. So what emotional intelligence will do is it greases the gears, so to speak. It lubricates how everybody can just enhance with their team. Leadership is improved. People are willing to follow a leader, and they're not angry at the leader. They're actually inspired by the leader. All of these factors matter. And so if EQ training is utilized, all of this stuff is enhanced. And when people are working at their best, the business works at its best.
Yeah. I think you mentioned trust. It's a really big thing, especially when it comes to, interpersonal relationships in the workplace. And this could be, just peer to peer, in the workplace relationship. Sometimes it's a relationship between the manager and the team as well. And um, I also definitely kind of relate this with, the jobs that I've done before, and even in my day-to-day work now, I feel like trust has really emerged to be something that everyone struggles with, especially because most of us are working in a virtual environment. Where's the trust, right? And you mentioned that, like emotional intelligence is a really big part, and the training will help people get there. But to make it more specific, in the context of trust, can we make an example, or can you give an example about how emotional intelligence training could help, say, for example, two employees or two peers working in the same team to trust each other more?
Well, for one, what all we have to think about is what would cause somebody to feel trustworthy, or to feel trusted. And, first of all, being honest, keeping our word. The On the interpersonal level of emotional intelligence, it's about social responsibility. That's the one that has to do with working for the greater good, and even when nobody's looking, it's about not really working for my benefit. I'm working for the benefit of other people. And so certainly being honest, not lying, is part of that. Even showing up on time, keeping your word. If I say I'm going to be somewhere, if I say I'm going to be somewhere, I need to be there. The little things. It's not always one big thing. It's like when you build a house, you use one brick at a time. Every day I show up, people know it's my reputation. Will Adam tell the truth today? Yes, he will. He's never lied. He says he'll never lie. I trust that he's going to keep his word when he says he's going to keep his word. It's the small things that build up every day. And so when people go through this training, and they're taught to do these things, if somebody has a low level of social responsibility, maybe they need to work on that and they didn't know before. Maybe their peers around them, that's where this communication takes place. If I'm speaking with other people about somebody else, how do you feel about so and so? And I don't reveal any personal information, but I bring it back and say, okay, let's work on this. Why, if you haven't kept your word, and maybe they know they haven't kept their word. Well, why? What is happening? Is a schedule getting in the way? Are things happening to you that are not being told to somebody else? Maybe that information needs to be shared.
Yeah.
It's always a breakdown in communication is what happens.
Yeah.
So I hope
Yeah. I
if
feel
you
like
want to get
what
more specific, I guess we can.
No, I think what I'm understanding from this and my interpretation of the example that you gave is, in the context of emotional intelligence and trust in a team, in a professional relationship, let's say, there are social cues perhaps, and there are ways that a person would hinge on to be able to trust somebody else. And with emotional intelligence, we'll be able to tell with time, and obviously with communication, with getting to know your peers, your coworkers a bit better. And obviously, if the level of emotional intelligence is low, obviously you're not going to be able to pick up on those cues. Hence, you won't be able to actually do the little things like, like your social responsibilities, like you were saying earlier, because sometimes
Exactly.
it starts with understanding, right? And I guess that's a big part of where we really need to hone in on our emotional intelligence to be able to work better, collaborate better, and build trust in teams.
Exactly. And if somebody is used to being abused by a leader at another company and they come to my company and
Mm.
I'm the leader, they're
Yeah,
already mistrustful of me because of what happened to them before.
that's
So
true.
now, and you already said it. We have to build those relationships. We have to get to know people. It's my job as a leader to gain that trust, and it requires empathy on my part to get to know them and understand their position, where they're coming from.
Yeah,
If I don't get to know them as a human
yeah.
and understand and I get that emotional data, hey, this person was beaten up. They had money taken from them. They didn't get their last pay. Whatever.
Mm.
I need to be more delicate with this person, at least in the beginning, so that I can gain their
Yeah,
trust
absolutely.
and raise them up, nurture them in a,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
again, the little things. It's there. There's so much information that is contained within emotions, and these things matter.
Yeah.
These things matter because if I'm a leader and I am making these decisions and I'm emotionally punching people without even realizing it, I'm losing trust
Yeah.
because I don't realize that's what I'm doing. But because
Yeah.
you said it, you talked about the emotional cues.
Yeah.
If I'm in a meeting and I'm self-aware and I say something about a decision I want to do, and this person over here gets this look of terror on their face, do I ignore it?
Yeah.
Do I ignore it and just keep moving, or do I address it and go, what's on your mind? These things matter.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you mentioned decision. That's really interesting because business or life, it's a series of decisions we make every single day.
Hmm.
So emotional intelligence and decision, feel like there's a really close relationship there because obviously this is what we've been talking about for the past few minutes, where we talk about professional relationships. But I also think this can be applied to our personal lives, with in many other aspects. And I feel like when we make decisions, it's based on the data we gather from talking to other people, from getting to know the context, the surroundings around us. In the workplace, it's definitely based on discussions with your teams, but in life, it's probably sometimes even just a conversation you have with yourself. So lots of factors at place here, and we're talking about decision making, as a really important part in life. So, with that, what are your thoughts on emotional intelligence and decision making, whether it be in the workplace or in your personal life?
So we make decisions based on our understanding of a circumstance and our beliefs around it. And what people don't realize, and what I had to learn when I went through my training, is that emotions don't happen by accident. Emotions are preceded by thoughts. We have a thought. There's chemistry that happens in the brain, and then we feel the feelings that result from it. So our feelings they clue us into our thought processes.
Yeah.
So when we're making a decision about something, if we feel good or we feel bad about it, there's thoughts that are taking place. So sometimes we get impulsive. Like one of the skills is about impulse control.
Yeah.
We get into habits. We don't hardly even think about it. We're just used to doing something. Impulse buying, having a temper. These are all decisions.
Yeah.
And we don't look at them in that context. Usually when we think of a decision, it's like, do I want this to buy this car? Or what do I want for lunch? But every day we wake up every time we have a reaction to somebody else, that's a choice.
Yeah.
That's a decision. And so if we want to make better choices, better decisions about things, we have to have a clear understanding of what it is that we're making a choice about. So that means having an accurate understanding of the scenario. We see it, and it happens a lot on social media where you have all these disagreements, people yelling at each other. You can't really understand. You can't have a conversation on social media. It doesn't work. So there's a lack of understanding of what's really happening. And when you're talking about two people together, a husband and wife, two friends, a parent, child, when you're talking about interpersonal relationships in that respect, making choices about family decisions, how does this choice, first of all, what do I believe about this decision? What goal do I want to achieve? And how is it going to impact the family? Because, and that has to do with emotion, because there is an emotional fallout to every choice we ever make, good or bad.
Yeah.
So to be emotionally intelligent is to understand what those impacts are. And is this a good decision or is this not a good decision based on that information?
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. There's a lot that goes into a simple thing as making a decision, right? Because like you said,
Mhm.
life's you wake up and you make decisions straight away. And I think this is definitely something same book that I forgot the name of. I read from that is we thought that we were rational and thinking creature, but actually we're feeling creatures. So
Mhm.
most of the time we make decisions based on how we're feeling. I think this is probably a book on habits or something like that. So like understanding our emotions and being able to get past the feeling and actually getting into the doing is very important.
Mhm.
And you already mentioned interpersonal relationships. You already mentioned how, like when we have a better understanding and empathy, definitely like the biggest factor here, empathy, when we have that level of understanding and coming from a place of understanding, we are able to build trust. And this applies to personal life as well. And it's going to help with your interpersonal relationships, no matter which kind of relationship this is. And when it comes to relationships, whether it be professional or personal, we know that parts of our lives we deal with a lot of conflicts, and that leads us to the sort of like the final part of the theory here, where we really want to address what about when we enter conflict, because we've talked about, let's build empathy, let's get in there, get understanding, and understand the little things to build better interpersonal relationships. But what if we have done everything we can, we've got that level of understanding, we've come from a place of empathy, but we still get into conflicts? So when we're in that situation of conflicts, how can emotional intelligence help us?
So we have to leverage several different skills. Number one, if there's a level of conflict, and so maybe if you and I, hopefully you and I have already built a good relationship in the workplace, whether maybe we're friends or something, and we're having a conflict. I say something that offends you, or you say something that offends me. There's an issue, and the first thing that needs to happen, that is preferred to happen, is number one, for me to understand how I'm feeling and why.
Yeah.
That has to do with the self-awareness element to it. What happened that triggered me to get my feelings hurt? Because that's number one. Because people can say and do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean we get triggered necessarily. Somebody
Yeah.
can come up to me and hurl all kinds of insults at me. That doesn't mean I have to choose to react to it. So the first thing that I need to do if I'm angry or frustrated or have my feelings hurt is identify, why are my feelings hurt? What was said? What was said? What kind of thinking did it stimulate in my mind? And what that will do is it'll do one of two things. One, I can analyze and go, you know what, I probably don't need to be offended by this as much as I am, so maybe I can relax. Or the second thing is, now that I understand how I feel and why I feel it, now I can turn around and communicate that to you.
Yeah.
Because in order to solve conflict, I have to be able to communicate how I feel to you without you taking offense to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so when I communicate with you, being able to express myself, number one is to be able to express my emotions to you. And that means not only verbally, but also through my facial expression and all the nonverbal cues that come with it. So if I have an angry look on my face and I'm pointing my finger in yours, that's not a good way to resolve anything because it's an attack.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So what EQ helps me do is express myself to you in a non-offensive way.
Yeah.
Because what I'm really wanting to do is I want, we're friends, we're family, we're whatever. I want to matter to you.
Mm.
So in order for me to matter to you, I have to express to you what it is that's happening. And maybe you didn't know you did something.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows? I mean, and that's the part of self-awareness too, because when I analyze the situation, I may be making assumptions.
Yeah.
And when I communicate with you and I express my feelings, when you said or did this, I felt this way, and I'm avoiding words might uh, that you might get defensive about, like, the word you. You did this. You. That's people will get their defenses up when we talk that way. So when I talk about talk about the behavior, not the person.
Yeah.
So they will go, okay, well, and maybe they might give us some emotional data that we didn't know. Adam, something happened that day. I was in a bad mood. There's always more to it, and
Yeah.
it's about negotiating. It's like, listen, that's not okay, because it's also about being assertive. If somebody's overstepped the boundary, like I have a boundary, you overstepped it. It's not okay. And if somebody doesn't want to listen to that,
Mm.
we have to be firm.
Yeah.
This is not okay.
Yeah.
I love you, and
Mm.
this is not okay. So this can't happen anymore.
Mm.
So what do and that's when the dialogue starts. And we try to keep it as calm as we can. Hopefully the other person is emotionally intelligent too. But but the only way we resolve conflict is by exhibiting emotional intelligence, understanding the other person's position,
Yeah.
because we don't always have all the information, and we have to come from a place from that.
Yeah.
Even if we think we understand it all, because we get angry and we think we know the thing, and we're gonna we're gonna tell them what for, and
Yeah.
then we find out that what we assumed was real wasn't even real.
Yeah, that makes so
So,
much sense. I think Brene Brown got this part just like right on the head. And I think in one of the books that I read from her, she said, always start by saying something like, the story I'm making up is.
mhm,
And I think I find that to be very helpful. But the thing that you mentioned before also is really helpful in the overall situation, which is an understanding of the self. Because emotional intelligence is not just about picking up on how other people are feeling and how other people might feel, but also
mhm,
how you're feeling in the first place. Because if you don't know that you're perhaps agitated or angry about what's been happening and you lash out in different ways, then that's definitely not going to help with the conflict. It probably is just going to aggravate what's been happening. So,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, and emotions are contagious. If I enter into a conversation with somebody and I'm exuding that nonverbal anger and anxiety, it's gonna rub off on the other person. And also, when we try to express ourselves, I think it's happened to all of us when we're
Yeah.
angry and we want to say what we want to say, but we don't know exactly how to say it, and so we get frustrated and even more upset because we don't know how to express ourselves. And that just makes it even worse. So the more we understand ourselves before we even enter a conversation, the better.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. We always need to start from ourselves. You start from within
Mhm.
and then, go about understanding others. So that's probably rounds out the theoretical part of this discussion. There's a lot of uh, little nuggets of wisdom there, like the theory of emotional intelligence. But we would like to be more practical, which is why on the show we have this segment where we talk about a practice, and hopefully you have a good practice to share with us. So if we were to say talk about
a practice when it comes to well-being? Obviously, the topic is emotional intelligence, but perhaps in the context of well-being in general, could you share with us a practice that helps you improve your well-being?
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned, all our emotions for happen because of our thinking. So, a practice that I would encourage anybody to do is pay attention to your verbal speech when you're talking, especially when you're talking about yourself.
Mm,
So every day, because we'll say things out loud. The words that we spew out of our mouth is a reflection of our thought.
yeah,
So if I'm in the middle of something and I say, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so brainless." When we say things like that, that is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves.
yeah,
And the thing to remember is that our subconscious is listening. We
yeah.
have a relationship with ourselves. So when we say these things out loud, we're hearing ourselves, and it has a negative impact on us. We have to stop that. If it and we probably the most important, I would say, is the I am statements. Saying I am stupid, I am whatever. We're identifying with whatever comes after that. So instead of saying I am, we want to say things like that. We want to talk about the thing, not really self.
Mm,
And if we ever do say I am, we want to say things like I am smart. I am better than this. I
yeah,
am, positive statements, because what we say, it really, really matters. Even if we're alone, we think that sometimes we're, hearing what other people say is important, and it is, but I mean, maybe something we hear on the television or on the phone, whatever. What we say about self is probably the most important. And if we find ourselves saying these things, we have to start investigating, why am I saying this? Is this true? Because if we're saying, because negative emotions are more powerful than positive, energy wise. I learned this from Dr. English.
yeah,
They're, they're more powerful. So the more we can minimize negative feelings and maximize the positive, the better.
yeah,
So in everyday speech, I mean, just be mindful of it.
yeah.
And the more you pay attention to it, the better. And when that happens, you actually start controlling your words better too.
Yeah, that's interesting how it's so simple, yet we probably don't think about it. We just go
We
about our
don't.
days, and yeah, like you said, we probably make statements when we talk to ourselves in our head, or when we talk to people about what's been going on with our lives. Um, and yeah, I agree that that affects your day, and then in turn your life quite a bit. And this seems to be a really good practice to start with. And you mentioned that it would change, probably come to context of well-being and emotional intelligence. It'll probably make you feel better. So I'm just trying to
Exactly.
kind of summarize some of the benefits of this. Probably makes you feel better about yourself, and perhaps
Hmm.
even your day, right? Because when you feel better, you do better. Especially
Exactly.
when you mentioned earlier that we when we feel something, we'll like take actions, and we didn't really know that the actions that we take sometimes are affected by our emotions. So
Exactly.
what would be some other benefits you would say besides feeling better?
Well, besides feeling better, now that I'm controlling, I'm communicating better for one.
Yeah.
I'm able to control my thinking. If I can control my thinking, then I'm controlling my feelings. I'm controlling my energy. I'm controlling my focus.
Hmm.
And also that now that allows me to change, to give myself positive speech. It's not just about minimizing the negative and not feeling bad. It's about feeling good.
Yeah.
So, I'm able to control my verbiage that way, and it also enables me to, when I communicate with other people, because I have developed that skill of speaking to myself. When I talk to somebody else, I'm also more mindful of the words that I use to them too, because words are
Yeah.
powerful.
Right.
Words are powerful, and if they're not able to process emotionally certain words in a good way, like, some words don't hurt my feelings, but they might yours.
Yeah, that's so true.
So if I'm speaking with you and I go, oh, I need to be careful. I shouldn't say this. I'll use a different word. And I have found myself when I communicate with other people, I will actually stop. There's nothing wrong with pausing. If you're in the middle of a conversation, stop and think. It's about being more mindful. So on top of feeling better, it actually helps with communication with other people.
Mm. Yeah, that's such a great benefit. So we should all start practicing this. But I would imagine that there might be some challenges when you go about this because, we're so used to just say things. If I might just explain it very bluntly, we're just, we are in a conversation and we meet someone, we just talk. So I assume there would be some challenges. What would you say to be some of the main challenges then when we start with this practice every day?
Well, for one, is catching it before it leaves your mouth. Because our mind moves so fast. It is
Yeah.
so fast.
Yeah.
When we feel the feelings, the thought has already taken place. Like if we were to take our emotions and put it down, this is why journaling is so useful.
Mm.
If we take our thinking and put it down on paper, what takes a split second in real time, we could fill pages in a notebook. All of that information went lightning fast in our minds. So when we're blurting out things, when we say things, it's already left our mouth. So I think that's the biggest challenge with the exercise I'm talking about is catching what we're about to say before it happens. And that has everything to do with self-awareness.
Yeah.
So, and especially when we're speaking with somebody else. So, it's one thing to catch something that comes out of my mouth when I'm talking about me, but when I'm in conversation with you and I'm about to say something, first of all, understanding what it is and how it's going to affect you if I say it, and then stopping myself.
Mm.
That's a process, and that takes effort, and that takes forethought. And it's like anything else. The more we exercise that muscle, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of forgiving yourself when we make these mistakes and just trying again and trying
Yeah.
again because even I still catch myself saying things now and again. I'm not, I'm hardly a master, so to speak. I'm always learning. I'm always trying to grow.
Yeah.
So, I'll actually correct myself. I won't just
Yeah.
say I'll do it next time, but I'll restate what I just said differently.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I find that to be very encouraging because if you say something wrong, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes it's just a matter of reframing it. And I think from what you said earlier, journaling is a good practice to sort of combine with this, right? Because we're talking about verbal speech, we're talking about communicating with others in conversations, but at the same time, being able to journal out our thoughts and reframing how we would describe a situation or even ourselves, I find that would be even more impactful because when you put your thoughts on paper, it lasts much longer and you're able to process things. So something you said earlier, like if someone were to say, "Oh, I'm stupid," that yeah, like obviously your words form your thoughts, and subconsciously that's probably how you're feeling. But
Hmm.
being able to write down on paper that this thing that I did was stupid and I am not stupid, that would probably be a better affirmation for people, I guess. Because we always try to combine different practices here, and I find that the practice that you suggested would be really good when combined with journaling. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, absolutely. It like you said, it teaches somebody to understand the feelings and what they mean. All
Yeah.
that data, it slows it down. So it clarify. And when it comes, like we talked about before, with interpersonal skills, being able to communicate with somebody. If I'm trying to understand myself and I put it down on paper, it clarifies a lot of what's on my mind before I ever speak to that person. So we don't always have to do it up here. We can do it on paper, and in fact, I'd recommend it. I would encourage it. I've done it.
Mm.
And it helps you feel better because you finally can see on paper what it is why you're feeling the way you are.
Yeah.
So definitely, I would highly encourage it,
Yeah.
especially when we're feeling scared about something.
Yeah. Totally. Oh, that's very helpful. I find that to be an interesting data point for you to look back on as well, like especially when you
Hmm.
try to make sense of what happened in the past. And this goes back to emotional intelligence, right? Because if you don't really understand how you feel, but you go through your notes, you might be able to make sense of how you were feeling. And I've seen that this many times in my personal life. So I bet it would probably be very helpful for others as well, because sometimes you couldn't really make sense of the situation when it was happening. But afterwards, when you go back through your notes, go back through the way that you were speaking to yourself, you're able to understand, oh, that was actually how I was feeling. And that's why I acted the way that I acted. And then you have solutions for, a better way of dealing with similar situations moving forward.
Exactly. Exactly. And on top of that, you have a history that you can look back on. And if a similar situation happens again and you respond better than you did before, now you have something to look at and you go, you know what? I'm making improvements.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can actually see that I am improving. And that is so encouraging to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. Growing as a person, very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned at the beginning about well-being being wealth in
Hmm.
your understanding and like different areas of life, and this very practice of just reframing the way that you speak and paying attention to the way that you speak to yourself and about yourself.
Hmm.
Um, I find that you already mentioned it could not only impact your personal, like your feeling in general, but also the way that you interact with other people. And I find this to be especially important when it comes to the different areas of wealth that you mentioned earlier. So, if we were to say, make a conclusion about how this very simple practice could impact our well being, how would you say to be the overall impact?
Oh, it'd be huge. It would be huge. I mean, our interpersonal skills improve, our relationships get better. Like, it feels good to just blurt something out. Like if we're in a bad mood and I just say something nasty, like all that nonverbal energy is being put out there. That's
Yeah.
going to affect our family. It's going to affect our friends. When we're in a group together, it's going to repel people. So number one, it uh, helps with the relationships element of wealth. Our personal, I mean, satisfaction. That's one of the forms of. I mean, how obviously our satisfaction goes up if we're getting rid of all the negativity to the best of our ability. And I know a lot of people have things they struggle with. That's understandable. It's just to the best of our ability, minimize the negativity to increase the satisfaction. Our mental health improves, our physical health improves, our emotional health improves because we feel better, we do better. Our money improves because maybe we can because if we're speaking negatively about ourselves, maybe we don't pursue a raise, maybe we don't pursue a promotion, maybe we don't start that business. All these negative
Mm.
thoughts impact our choices.
Yeah.
So if we encourage ourselves rather than tear ourselves down, it's like I told you in the beginning when I was talking about my story.
Yeah.
I had a better mindset, which allowed me to encourage myself to go do something I had never done before. That was only because I had better feelings about myself, better thoughts about myself. And then we have better time. We have better time. People who own a business or run a business, they are in more. It's a give and take, but a lot of times they're in more control of their time.
Yeah.
Right? People who are better. I mean, if you have more money as a result of things, you have the ability to take more time off of work. I mean, it just allows you to communicate better and maybe negotiate more time. There's all kinds of benefits that can happen even on the time side of it.
Yeah.
So, but
Wow.
overall, it's just, even when it comes to having gratitude, we're speaking positively. We're showing gratitude for the things that we have. I have a wealth in this area. I have wealth in that area. I have a good amount of money. I have great relationships, whatever. Rather than saying, I don't have anything. I don't have this or I don't have that, and bringing ourselves down. So just the speech alone, the thought process behind the speech, the self-awareness of why we're saying what we're saying, it has a huge, huge impact.
Yeah. That's a very good reminder because I'm very guilty of, I think, not speaking kindly of myself, I guess. Not in the sense
Well,
that
it
I'm
happens.
saying I'm stupid, but yeah, it happens. Like I just met a friend before I walked into the studio today, randomly on the tram, and she was saying, "Oh, hey, how are you? How's things going?" I'm like, "Oh." Like not really positive about whatever's happening in my life, and I feel like uh, the chat with you today is definitely very helpful in the sense that I'm going to reframe how I speak about my days, at the very least, just to reframe how I feel about it and, pick myself up. That's very, very encouraging because I just laugh so hard when you mentioned that because I just happened to, say something not so nice about my life earlier. But
Well,
you know what?
it
Life's great.
happens.
Yeah.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
And and listen, bad things happen. If I'm walking down the street and I get hit by a car, that's not a good thing. I mean, there's
Yeah.
certain realistic. We have to be realistic in our views too. That's all part of being optimistic, which is another element of EQ, is being optimistic and looking for the bright side of things without ignoring the negative.
Mm.
It's like, look, I mean, I got a bill that I didn't expect. Now I have to pay X amount of dollars that I wasn't expecting. That's going to hurt me financially. That's not a good thing. I mean, there's no real bright way to say it. However, saying things like, I'll get past it. I can take care of it. I'll find a way to get around it. I can do this. I can do that to overcome. But on this side of things, I have this going for me. It's the balance between the two.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I've reminded myself of that many times, and I hope that that reminder will help our listeners as well. This is not always about the sunny side of thing. There's so much more to life, but starting with the positive and reminding yourself of the good things is always a good place to sort of bring yourself to, especially when it comes to emotional intelligence and realizing what's going on. You don't want to drag yourself down the rabbit hole. You want to pick yourself up out of it. So yes, that's a great reminder. Thank you, Adam.
Oh, you're welcome. You're
Yeah.
welcome. And when we're positive like that, it puts us in a position to fix the problems that are getting in the way.
Yeah, totally. So now we are okay. We've gone through the theory, the practice. We're kind of feeling okay. I'm not sure how the listeners are feeling, but I'm feeling much better than I was feeling when we started this, especially after the conversation I had with my friend earlier. Um, we would like to give this sort of stage to you, Adam, because we know that you're passionate about emotional intelligence. That's what you do for work and on a daily basis. But we're sure that as a human, you're passionate about much more. So, perhaps you would like to take this chance to share with our audience or with the world, what is something else that you're really passionate about and you would like to get more people to care about, perhaps.
You know, I'm I am a very spiritual person. I'm not about to get preachy on the show, but I think it's important for people to pay attention to the spiritual side of themselves because humans are uniquely that. So that is something that is a huge part of my life that I pay very close attention to. That I think is the most important thing in life is spiritual things. Um, but again, like I said, I'm not going to start preaching at people. But I think that is incredibly important that people at least give consideration to.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a strong message. And, regardless of our backgrounds, our religions, I feel like I consider myself to be a spiritual person, and I find that a lot of people do too nowadays, especially over the years that have just passed. With what's going on in the world, it's just so important to pay attention to our spiritual life. It
hmm
has a life of its own. So thank you for that message. And
you're welcome.
before we wrap up, we always have like activities and things. But recently, now that we've got an audience, we have questions from the audience. And I saw two really interesting questions that I would love to get you to address today before we let you go. In the
Okay.
context of emotional intelligence, we've talked a lot about relationships, interpersonal, professional relationships with ourselves. But I noticed that these questions actually have a strong focus on the relationships with the self. And
Okay.
one of the questions is acknowledging our emotion is a good thing, but how can we manage ourselves when it gets overwhelming?
I think in those moments, if we are a spiritual person, we do believe in God, I think prayer is important there. If we're not at the very least, I think those are moments where journaling is really, really important, because to get our emotions, like we feel just in the depths of overwhelm, get our emotions on paper. I don't care who you are. Get our feelings on paper, and at the very least, understand what's going through our mind. And if we can understand what's going through our mind, then at that point, we can then address it. One, do I have control over the situation? Yes or no? What I wrote down, is any of it true? Because sometimes, the things that we're thinking aren't real. When we actually get it on paper and we look at it and we go, what am I thinking about? What is this? It's like all this stuff that's overwhelming me. When I actually get it on paper, I go, what? This is ridiculous. We wind up relieving ourselves. But at the very least, and also just understand that we're going to have bad days now and again. This happens to me. This happened to me the other day. I mean, I was feeling down about something. Just sometimes you do the best you can, get a good night's sleep, and then the next day it'll be better. Because that was part of my problem. I wasn't getting enough sleep. So it was just, sometimes it's not just about journaling and doing all this heavy lifting emotionally. It's just sit back and take a nap. Sometimes it's really that simple.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does require writing things down. I know a lot of people deal with anxiety. I know a lot of people deal with depression. I can't claim that emotional intelligence is a cure for any of that, but it certainly is helpful. So, I mean, yeah, just and again, just, we have to give ourselves some grace. We have to give ourselves some permission to be not okay sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's
so true.
That's human. It's human. We do the best we can with the skills that we have. And sometimes we just need a good cry. Sometimes that's what happens too. Go take yourself in a corner where nobody's around and just give it a cry. And take some aspirin if you get a headache, and get some sleep. And then, sometimes that's what's needed.
Yeah. And taking your time as well, I find to be very important. Sometimes we just kind of in a rush, like I have to feel okay when I wake up. Sometimes you don't, and it's fine.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
take it one day at a time. And yeah, I agree with your strategy of journaling things out and really paying attention to what is actually true and what's not. Because sometimes
Yeah.
we just, make a web out of nothing. And, that's not helpful. But at the same time, like you said, we just have to let ourselves be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then negotiating the situation too. If I can solve the problem, let's solve it. If I can change my thinking, let me change it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah. Focusing on the solution is going to be very helpful as well. So that's one of the questions. I find that to be very helpful because I feel like we all get that overwhelming feeling and sensation from time to time in our lives. If not every other day, then definitely at least once every now and again.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question I find to be very interesting is in the context of receiving harsh criticism. And the question is, how can we regulate our emotion during an intense discussion, such as receiving harsh criticism?
When you're in the moment, obviously when this is where self-awareness becomes handy. When somebody, and because the message itself might be accurate, but the way it's delivered is harsh.
Yeah.
So my suggestion, first of all, is try not to focus on the manner of its delivery. Try to focus on the substance of the message.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Is what they're saying useful? Is it real? Will it make you better? If it does, focus on that and use it. The second thing I would do is, even after the fact, after you go home and after the conversation is over, reflect back on the discussion. And again, that goes back to the self-awareness. What was being triggered in our mind during that conversation? Because the words that hit us, that went into our ear, were triggering thoughts and beliefs about whatever topic it was. Maybe I believe I'm a bad worker. Maybe I believe I'm not worth the money I'm being paid. Maybe I believe I'm about to lose my job. When this person is talking to me and using those words and being harsh, all those thoughts and beliefs are going to be triggered. And maybe that person didn't intend to do that, but all this thinking was being triggered in my head. So if I'm able to work out and readjust my own thinking, my own beliefs about a situation, that conversation maybe is not as harsh as it might be next time. So use it as a growth experience. If
Right.
we're going to go through the experience, at least use it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, make the most of it. And
That is
again,
very interesting.
do the best you can.
Yeah. It's a really good way to look at that kind of situation because I bet, like if anyone were to receive harsh criticism, it's really not fun to be in that situation, not fun to hear the criticism being delivered in that manner. And I think, we like you said, might feel a different sense about our self-worth in many different contexts. So, reframing how it's kind of impacting our lives would be more important. And I feel like not taking it personally as well is a skill. And having the emotional intelligence to say, I know myself, like I know my worth, and I can reframe my emotion in a more productive manner would be more helpful in those situations. But I could imagine, like if that were to happen frequently, then it's definitely like a muscle that you have to sort of do some heavy lifting to build, just like going to the gym and doing a workout, to gain muscles.
That's right. And you made a point about growing from it, about the fact that when we're in a conversation like that, this is where empathy becomes really useful too, because that person who's talking to us, if we try to understand from their perspective, you talked about not taking it personal. That's what I was thinking of. It helps us to not take things personally when we realize they're being harsh, not because of us, but because of the situation they're in. Like
Mm.
if using empathy, if we realize that they are hyper stressed and they are freaking out and they're saying something to us, it's not about me. It's not about me. They're just flying off the handle. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying this behavior is okay. It's just it helps alleviate the emotional pressure
Yeah.
when we realize, okay, they're acting crazy, so let me step back and let them say what they're going to say, and I'll just go back. I'll keep going with with what I'm doing. So it helps us not take things personally when we understand the person's position better.
Yeah. Absolutely. So much of it is done just by improving our emotional intelligence, isn't it? And it's
Yeah,
so simple, but sometimes we forget that, that's where it all starts.
exactly, exactly. And when you have two people who do that, when you have one person who shows empathy toward the other and controls the words that they use because they're paying attention to how they say things, and then this person does the same thing, and even if that person says something they shouldn't, and that the other person doesn't take it personally, the dynamic between the two people gets so much closer. And then when you have a whole team doing that, everything flows. In a family, when you have a family doing that, when you have a friendship doing that, the bond becomes stronger. That's where
Yeah.
trust starts happening, because
Yeah.
they both feel safe
Mm.
with the other.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a beautiful message to end with. Thank you so much. And those are all the questions we have for today. I find that to be very eye opening, especially a lot of the insights from today will equip us for whatever situations might arise in the future. Sometimes it's not about dealing with what's happening, but it's more about equipping ourselves with the knowledge to get ready, right? And, like emotional intelligence is not something that we can just pocket like a degree. We get it and yeah, we have it. But it's more like something you said, even you're not an expert and you improving every single day. And I think that is a really good reminder to our listeners because it is something we have to practice and pay attention to every single day.
You nailed it. It's an ongoing process. There's always more to learn,
Yeah.
and the more we do, the better we get at it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Adam. I've learned a lot from you, and hopefully our listeners have as well. We will definitely probably hear from you or, see your assessments and your work. And I'm sure if any listeners are interested, they will probably find their ways to you and ask more about the work that you do. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for hosting me. And if anybody does want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look me up, Adam Rosensweig, and connect with me and we can have a chat.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.